Today, I'm going to share some of the studies that use the network lens to understand how networks serve as a means to understand individual agency and the change of their social systems. So the title of today's talk is more organizational focused. So the complete title is Network Learning Ecosystem, Evolving by Design, a social network approach to leadership for systemic change. I hope my work, although its focus is on organization and networks and change, will connect with yours in some way. So why the idea of a learning ecosystem? The concept is not new, but deserves our greater attention, given what we have been through since the global pandemic. I situate this presentation in this pandemic context because during the last 2 years, much information and scholarship has been generated about learning losses caused by the lack of face-to-face classes as a result of school closure. And there has been a surge in COVID cases in Taiwan, and since this month, and schools and learnings are greatly affected, even though many schools are getting reopened and that there is still a large proportion of learning days missing during this period of time. And as you can see in this chart, with the data from 209 countries, a lot of the schools in the majority of these countries have fully, this is a condensed view, though a lot of the countries have fully or partially closed for almost a third of a year in terms of the school days. Despite some of the great progress in ICT developments in education, there's no technology that can substitute teachers' ability to generate learning among students based on conventional in-person teaching process. Not to mention that some of the teachers are still struggling with the use of technology. I don't know if you have the chance to discuss this part, but I would love to hear about your thoughts on this. And so the loss of learning in Denmark, the loss of learning may exacerbate the existing learning gaps between what is learned in school and what is needed in the real world. The importance of teachers and the recognition of education as essentially a human interaction endeavor is now even clearer. So this urges us to re-examine the notion of learning and conditions that foster learning for not just students, but for educators as well. So given the change in global social landscape, we can think about our social world to be not only interconnected, but also interdependent, with each one of us playing an essential role in making our social system cohesive that can support our collective purposes or developments. Learning is social and relational. I think we all agree on that. Our goal as an educator is to create a learning ecosystem that connects learners with multiple learning opportunities that are tailored to individuals and accessible to everyone, that are across period of time through different channels with different sectors involved. I've written an article about how to get ready for moving towards a learning ecosystem. The core idea is that schools need to develop the capacity for self-improvement by conducting self-assessments of their school system's health as a way to identify areas of improvement, in which is a key process in order to become a self-evolving and self-improving system. And developing and maintaining such a learning ecosystem requires its many subsystems or agents to work together and involve in concert. And therefore, understanding the linkages that connects parts of a system and its resulting structure of coherence is very important to effective learning ecosystem. So given the importance of social interactions in learning and education, how do we know our level of development for a learning ecosystem, and what do we need in order to get there to make an impact at scale? One of the recent movements in educational research communities calls for the use of improvement science in addressing a wide variety of educational issues, including learning. The basic idea is to use data, evidence, or network strategies to solve complex organizational problems in order to pursue its continuous improvement as an organizational system. And this approach pays particular attention to the target problem that needs to be addressed, as well as the people who are going to tackle them. So the center of this improvement process are social learning and collective work for individuals to work together for better results. And the process also aims to create networked learning communities that focus on collective problem solving and improvement, which plays a critical role in driving this change process. As I mentioned, those networked learning communities can be thought of as a means to achieve a learning ecosystem for everybody, because the process involves people working together to solve critical organizational issues. And the practice of these networked communities involve individuals in reaching out for new ideas and the willingness to take risks in trying those new ideas. It also has to be supported with the type of social infrastructure for meaningful interactions and connectivity, and also to use the results to make informed decisions for systems improvement. And this journey emphasizes the role of relationships. Relationships are at the base of system cohesion. It is the capacity to form those relationships that really matters and can bring about change at scale. So how can we leverage the power of relationships to grow impact? We need to shift our way of thinking about organizational systems from a traditional organizational chart to a more socially connected informal system. The study shows that 80% of the work gets done through those informal channels. And a lot of the times, those movers and shakers are not always at the center of the network. Sometimes they are at the periphery of the network. And there are sometimes those informal social leaders that have the disproportionate influence over the entire social system. Now, how do we make sense of those informal organizational systems through the lens of social networks? One of the important skills is to develop network literacy. The idea of network literacy is developed by the network science in education team in New York. And I've been working with the team as well over the past few years. This is actually one of the important publications that I use a lot in my work, especially in promoting network science. And there are a couple of core ideas of how to be network literate. And to start, we have to understand that and be aware of the fact that networks are everywhere. I'll give you a couple of examples. The first one is, this is a 32-year Canadian obesity study. The yellow nodes are obese people. The green nodes are non-obese people. One of the main study findings shows that obese people tend to form clusters with similar others over time, which means that there is a strong homophily social influence impact on the way we form our networks. Another network example is this co-author network, where we can see the pattern of who published with whom on which topics that is colored by, that is divided by different colors. And for those of you who love wine, you may notice this grape family network in which the lines indicate family relationships among several dozen common grape cultivars. The family network indicates that many varieties in grapes are more closely related than we previously thought, and therefore they form a single large family tree. And the more widely known grapes are highlighted in bold. Yeah. And one final example is this ingredient network. It is shaped and drawn by mapping the concurrence in recipe from different parts of the world. One of the interesting findings we can easily see is that garlic, which is at the center of this network, is a common ingredient used by Southern European, Latin American, and East Asian. And of course, there are plenty of other kinds of networks surrounding us. And if we are sensible enough, and we may find our world full of those networks, and some of them may surprise you, and some of them may concern you to take some action. The rest of the network literacy practices, including, we have to know that network describes how things connect and what is flow throughout the network. The network reveals patterns of those connections. We can observe networks through visualization techniques. And it is possible to understand real-time networks like Twitter data. I've also been working with Ellen on several projects that we analyze Twitter data of school principals to see how their interactions and connections with others are shaped by their online and offline networks. And finally, network can also use to compare different social systems. And the networks can help us understand complex and dynamic social systems and how network behaviors, such as the Canadian obesity study, are affected by the dynamics of the social structure. Network literacy provides a basic understanding of the feature of the network and how we see our world from a social network lens. In reality, studies show that we can only perceive 30% of our own social network, which means that there are 70% of untapped network resources that are out there at our disposal. But we have to think about a way to access those 70% of untapped network resources. So how do we do that? It takes the combination of network literacy and individual leadership to do this. The leadership here refers to individual agency that has the potential social influence over others. So when we talk about network literacy, we can't not talk about individual leadership that occurs through social influence. So as a network literate leader or individual, it's important to be aware of your social networks and be intentional about the network, meaning that be intentional about how you want your network to look like. Planning your own network and how you may assess your network on a regular basis by adding or disconnecting some of the ties. And second, you probably have to have some basic skills of using some of the network sites or understanding network terms, such as influencers, influential centrality, brokerage. And once you are intentional about your own network, you might further think about with whom you want to get connected to shape your network identity. And then knowing how to access those contacts and resources is also important. And finally, you will be able to expand your network landscape and create your own networked communities for intentional purposes. Oh, there's a chat. Let me see if I check. Oh, I wish I could.
It's just a colleague who said that she had to go, so no worries.
Great. I want to be responsive. Thank you, Connie.
No, it's fine. No.
So again, I'd like to reiterate that the networks of relational ties is a key feature in shaping individual social behaviors and our collective behaviors of the system. Because there are several, I've summarized a couple of reasons why we need to take a network perspective on leading change. First, networks are a way of understanding our social systems, and work usually gets done through those social informal channels. And relational ties are channels from which we can access resources to accumulate social capital. By accessing those resources, we have a better chance to learn and exchange ideas for innovation. And through the process of connectivity, we have a chance to act as a change agent by using our leadership influence and establish shared norms and goals of the network that may help drive the outcomes. The combination of relationships and structures of relational ties and our shared beliefs, practices, and norms is how an organization creates its collective knowledge, also called the intellectual capital, which is crucial to organizational learning and innovation and change. And if we aim to develop an environment in which learning is supported for all, we must take on a networked leadership role, be intentional about the design of the system that supports interconnectivity and collective outcomes, so that the systemic change will be possible. Having said those, Ellen and I recently wrote an article about networks, leadership, and change. The framework is grounded on the concept of embeddedness, in which relational ties are embedded within dyads of individuals, and the structure of those ties can be consequential to network efficiency. The process begins from the notion that our personal characteristics, dispositions, thoughts, beliefs, or even leadership style may affect how our ties are developed or shaped. And with a network approach to change, such as designing different meetings, social infrastructure, or network intervention that supports or alter connectivity for organizational goals, it is likely that relational ties will be reestablished and new norms of the network behaviors will be developed, which constitutes the resulting network structure that can inform how organizational outcomes are achieved. The resulting network structure may also feed back to the system as the next existing norms of network behaviors. And this approach goes like a cyclic change process from a network perspective. One of the core ideas during this change process is at the center of the framework, which starts with a network goal of an organizational system. It can be as large as reform outcomes or as small as team collaboration, followed by intentional infrastructure design that supports the network goal, which leads to the resulting network structure that can be used to inform the direction of change progress. Keep this in mind. I will be using those concepts highlighted in orange font to discuss some of the network case studies in the following. The questions that may guide those studies include what is the network goal? And what is the infrastructure design or mechanisms or even the policy context that may drive the goal? And how is the network achieving the goal by looking at its resulting network structure? And the studies I'll be sharing will be focused on networks at several different levels, including the individual, group level, school level, and the systems level, as well as the kind of networks that are beyond conventional organizational boundaries. I'll give a brief introduction of the study context, background, and share a sampler of network outcomes of the case. So the first study here is situated in a high-performing elementary school in Taipei, Taiwan, with approximately 150 teachers and administrators. The data was collected at 2 time points in 18 and 19. At year 1 of the study, the school was run by a new and novice school principal whose leadership style is laissez-faire, meaning that doing nothing is doing everything. He believes that during his first year of principalship, it's best for him to observe the way things get done in the school, and therefore he really heavily relies on his administrative team to oversee the school. So the purpose of the study is to understand the principal's social network position as embedded in the larger school network. The network goal for the principal's viewpoint is to make sense of the school culture and empowering his teacher. The school has been known of its well-run, teacher-led professional communities in which teachers meet on a regular basis with their peers from the same grade level or with the same subject area assignment, or who share similar interest in developing project-based curriculum. We will be looking at the network structure formed by work-related advice-seeking relationships on a monthly and weekly basis. This network is obtained by a question that we ask the participant to assess their frequency of interactions with their colleagues, whom they turn to for work-related advice. So by work, we mean instructional practices and all the work of and all types of different kinds of work that are related to basically their main job in their school. So this is advice-seeking network from year 1. Notes are colored by role. Light green note is the school principal, and the red notes are administrative team. Dark blue notes are teachers. And of all the teachers, the light blue notes are science teacher as an example of a teacher team. The overall pattern of this network is that teachers tend to seek or exchange advice with their peers who share the same positional role as indicated by a cluster of the same color notes. In terms of the principal's network position, this graph indicates that in year 1, the principal was positioned at the periphery of the school network, which is not too far from our anticipation, as the position reflects his laissez-faire leadership style, spending most of his time observing his teachers and teams and not actively involved in decision-making. When compared with year 2, we can see that principal's ego network is expanded to include more teachers in his work-related inner network circle, and that the principal moves to a more central position that is closer to the mainstream of the school network. This is partly because in year 2 of the study, the principal, instead of passively observing the school, he was more actively involved in teachers' instructional meeting by doing more frequent classroom walkthrough, informal greetings, and attending the school-wide curriculum development team meetings, etc. And interestingly, when it comes to principal's connections with the teacher team, the principal's role as an instructional leader seems to be absent, as evidenced by the missing actor of principal in the science teacher network over time. The example of science teacher team is important in this study because they are expected to work with teachers from different subject matters, as well as grade level teachers, to develop the curriculum that is aligned with the current national curriculum reform policy in Taiwan in the next year. At the time of the study, the absence of school principal's role in the science teachers team network not only reflects the principal's leadership style and network goal of empowering teachers, but also suggests room for improvement if the principal aims to be more in teachers' instructional reform decision. All right, so here comes the second case study. The second case study is about the effect of a network intervention on the change in school's overall network structure. The case is situated at 2 well-regarded high-performing suburban elementary schools in Taipei, and both schools share a lot of similarities, including same school size, location, family socioeconomic status, and student composition. And both schools are also led by a novice principal who was the 2nd and 3rd year at their school at the time of the study. The school aimed to create networked learning professional communities in which teachers can engage in curriculum planning and instructional design. The only difference between the 2 schools is treatment. One school receives in-network intervention and one does not. The network intervention was conducted with the administrative team and teaching staff for a total of 6 hours throughout the first half of the semester. They were exposed to the idea of social networks, and were given the opportunity to discuss some of their school networks, meaning network data, and make sense of the data. And at the end of the intervention, they have to come up with a few solutions to promote meaningful connectivity that can help move forward with the implementation of curriculum reform policy. We will be looking at the reform-related advice relationships in the next slide. We ask participants to assess the frequency of their interactions with their colleagues from whom they seek advice regarding the implementation of curriculum reform. This is also, the two schools are also in Taiwan, so the network key is pretty much the same as the last case study. The green node, light green node is still the school principal, and red nodes are those administrators. Blue nodes are grade level teachers, and the dark green nodes are teachers with single subject assignments. Additional network key is node shape. Right now, the square nodes are those who serve as teacher leader in their teacher team. And at the treatment school, it's obvious that the network connectivity significantly increased over time. And we can see that on average, individual teachers develop a new tie. The network becomes more dense, less fragmented, more reciprocal, with fewer isolates. The principal becomes more central in the network. There are more cross-role interactions, and the role of teacher leaders seem to be more central and influential over time. On the contrary, at the control school, although their networks look more dense than the treatment school, its network cohesion level drops significantly over time, meaning that individuals are disconnected with two ties on average. Therefore, the network becomes less dense, more fragmented, more isolates, and less reciprocal. The principal at the control school moves to a periphery position, and their teacher leader seems to become less central in the curriculum reform network. This look tells us that network intervention may play a role in shaping of the school network structure, which helps us understand the extent to which the network goal of intervention is achieved. The next study brings us to a higher level of organizational system in looking at a cross-school network in a district in terms of their schools' collaboration among the collaboration networks among a leadership team within a school district in the US. The study is conducted in this mid-sized school district in California that serves 25,000 students populations. The study sample includes 44 central office leaders and school site leaders who completed the survey at 3 time points. So the average response rate is 93%. The school district aims to cultivate a climate of trust and collaboration. So its network goal also reflects its mission, which is to create cross-school or vertical collaboration between central office and school site leaders. The infrastructure that is in place at the district is this monthly leadership team meetings, and also partnering with the research university to conduct annual climate survey in order to assess their level of performance in achieving its missions and goals, which is fostering cooperation and trusting climate. And we will be looking at the advice-seeking relationships around a US-based reform implementation. We asked respondents, who do you turn to for advice about implementing the state standards? These two maps are at T1 and T3 with nodes representing the school leaders, including the central office leaders, and elementary school principals, middle school principals, and high school principals. The findings indicate that the overall advice-seeking ties increased for central office leaders, those red nodes, and also the elementary school principals and middle principals. However, the high school principals, meaning those orange nodes with the label, became more and more isolated over time, with much of the high school principals not connecting with any of the other leader colleagues for advice around the implementation of the curriculum reform, therefore making them continue to position in the periphery of the network. This particular finding is quite concerning when it comes to systemic reform change. So one of the implications for the school district is that they may have to revisit their infrastructure design or prioritize this issue when working with their partnering research university. All right, the next one of the two final studies, one of the study is takes us to New Zealand's reform context in education, a bit of a reform history. In the last few decades, New Zealand has been implementing several educational policy frameworks with a strong focus on building school culture for teaching and learning. Along these years, these policy frameworks have shifted the focus of collaborative practices from a school-based self-management approach to one that encourages greater teacher collaboration and collaboration in schools. And recent development of the policy framework includes the one that was released in 2016. It's called the Community of Learning Act policy, the COLE policy, which encourages schools that are geographically closer with one another to form a community of learning network and to work together towards curriculum reform. And we are interested in looking at the degree of collaboration among schools under this policy context. The data was collected in March 2019 from about 100 teachers and principals and the co-leaders with a school call of 5 schools. 80% of them completed the online survey and asked them to assess a few of their colleagues, assess their collaborative relationships with their colleagues from within and outside of their school. The network goal is clear, which is to form this cross-school collaboration for reform. The infrastructure is this external COLE policy push, and no particular activities or mechanisms or meetings are in place to implement this COLE policy. And we will be looking at the pattern of collaboration among the COLE schools. This particular COLE has five schools, 4 primary schools and 1 high school. There is a cross-school co-lead and a couple of site-wide school co-lead principals and assistant principals who are responsible for coordinating and facilitating cross-school collaboration for their teachers. We would expect to see that these leaders would work collaboratively across schools to share reform practices. However, this is what their actual collaborative ties look like among these leaders who held roles and responsibilities for promoting the COLE policy. What we also notice in this graph is that the co-lead is connected directly with only one of the 5 schools, and about half of the leaders are not connecting with other leadership colleagues from the other school. And when we take a closer look into the pattern of collaboration among teachers, this graph conveys everything but cross-school collaboration. The notes are colored by schools. As you can see that there is a very low degree of cross-school collaboration that are established by teachers, and that those collaborative ties are almost within school. Only 6 teachers connected with 1 peer from another school. So if some of these broker teachers left the school, there's a greater chance that the connection or collaboration will be disrupted. So what does this finding tells us? That 3 years after the COLE policy of 2016, there is still room to grow for developing those cross-school collaboration strategies. Remember, there is no clear infrastructure in place to support the COLE initiative. So one of the change initiative could be to design a formal infrastructure that provides opportunities for teachers to cross-school social professional interactions in a way that may continue to develop into a teacher-led community of practice. And in fact, we followed this study to do the follow-up 2 year of studies from another 2 COLEs, and there are some promising results. I'm hoping that I'll be able to share with you in the future. The final case is about a large regional network, and over the last 2 decades, interest in the formation and evolution of regional innovation networks has grown, while the growth in such networks is rarely a highly controlled process. Those regional hub leads, also known as a central player that acts as organizing, communicating structures within the network, can serve as important catalysts for innovation because their role is to organize network activities that can facilitate knowledge sharing and meaningful collaboration among those organizations or institutions, and all of which is essential to maintaining an effective network. The hub is usually coordinated by a leading university with the intent for them to engage stakeholders in their region, including local, county, and state governments, and private industry, and other universities and nonprofit institutions to focus on those regional needs and issues. And in this study, the focus is on sharing and bridging resources for STEM education. The goal of this study is to use social network data and analysis to look at the pattern of the STEM network and further inform the type of network they practice in a way that can enhance the achievement of participants in the network. But the study sample is a cross-sector STEM network that includes 316 organization institutions from within a county of California that are involved in cultivating STEM education and pipeline to careers. This network of organization has been organized as an ecosystem with the intention to support STEM and bring partners together for meaningful collaboration. These organizations represent 6 different stakeholder groups, including pre-K through 12 schools and school districts, institution of higher education, museums, zoo, after-school education programs, businesses, and industry and professional association, philanthropy and governments, and advocacy groups. The data were collected in the 2017 academic year through an online survey. The survey invited the representative of these organizations to assess their relationships with other organizations within the STEM network. So the network goal is to create strategic collaboration between or among network members. The infrastructure is these efforts of Network Hub in initiating meetings, organizing activities, and we focus on 2 network relationships. The go-to relationships ask respondents to nominate from a list of organizations in the STEM ecosystem who they go to for STEM education and career pipelines efforts, particularly those organizations with who they had contact and consider to be a reliable source of information that can influence their work. As for strategic collaboration relationship, we ask respondents to select from the same list of organizations with which they had a collaborative partnership around strategic planning, coordinating plans, joint efforts that create a foundation for future initiatives or specific actions to move forward in the future. And we will be looking at the networks of these 2 inter-organizational relations, particularly those cross-sector ties only. Nodes are sized by in degree. So the larger the node, the more the organization is being sought out. It's obvious that the ties are much more dense in the go-to type of information sharing relationship than in the collaboration relationship. This indicates that the pipes for resource sharing and cross-sector supports are in place and are at least being activated by almost all sectors for exchanging resources and information. However, even though those partners are accustomed to going to each other for information, relationships that are considered to be deeper and more intense for strategic collaboration are infrequent. This finding reflects area for potential growth for the ecosystem. This is also an opportunity for the hub to identify the nature of those more surface relationships, such as go-to relationship, and then determine where to strategically put efforts into deepening those relationships. And when we look at the individual sectors from this within sector network structure, the structures are relatively, the within sector ties are relatively sparse for both relationships compared to sector ties in the previous slide. But similar to the pattern of cross-sector ties, within sector ties are more dense for go-to relationships than collaboration relationships. So taken together, there appears to be a tendency for cross-sector interaction than for within sector ties. And those ties tend to be more surface level relationships, meaning those go-to relationships are more dense in comparison to those deeper and more intense collaboration relation. This also indicates that the surface level relationships were not converted into deeper collaborative and strategic ties that are needed to move the ecosystem forward. So such tendency for cross-sector interactions for both relationships suggesting the likelihood of boundary crossing and potential for brokering activity, which is also a critical feature to facilitating change at the systems level. However, in our analysis, we also found that such boundary crossing pattern is relatively weak between K-12 school district and institution of higher education for both types of relationships, despite the fact that both of these sectors should involve in the developing and delivering of STEM education. This also suggests that the critical role of higher education faculty in their efforts to bridge the gap between research and practice by building strategic partnerships with their K-12 practitioners. So to wrap up today, I start with the idea of learning ecosystem and why do we need to consider building the system for better results. Particularly, I focus on the mechanisms that drive the learning ecosystem, which is the important role of networks that may support or limit the capacity for individual and organizational outcomes. And each study site has its own network goal for organizational systems to achieve their goal. Creating the kind of conditions or infrastructure design that supports the meaningful connectivity learning is very important. For almost all my research projects, my team and I would work closely with the study sites to build a partnership relationships in which we researcher as an agency to collaborate with the site in the process of building those evidence-informed practices or collective decision-making. And some would call this process as network improvement science work, as I mentioned previously. And we start with setting up a network goal to make sure that these goals are aligned with the value or mission of our partnering site or some of the state or national standards. And then we develop instruments to assess the level of performance. And then we share the data back with the site in a way that facilitates discussion and sense-making of the data, then decision-making for improvement. In some cases, we need to provide network intervention activities to stimulate the change process. So the core idea is to use networks as one type of evidence, along with other psychometrics tools, such as individuals' thoughts, attitudes, beliefs, and all sorts of measures for organizational climate in order to identify areas of improvement. And because networks help reveal those underlying patterns of relationships that we can't easily see unless we use scientific approach to collect network information. So as organizations to align those policy and practices, it is important to recognize different roles and functions of networks so that schools or educational leaders may have a better sense of how networks can serve to support the decision of improvement and ultimately help themselves create their self-improving learning ecosystem. And one of the ongoing educational movements in promoting the idea of self-improving learning ecosystem is this NetEdu project initiated by my colleague from Barcelona, and Gita is also actively involved in this project. The idea of this project is in large part inspired by the research practice partnership work that we've been doing in the US over the last 10 years. We have been working with several school districts to help them generate data and evidence and also make sense of them so they can develop improvement strategies for the upcoming school year. And similar to this endeavor, one of the main goals of this NetEdu project is to use an online tool called the School Weaver tool to diagnose individual schools' efforts and performance in making the impact they wanted to make. The tool allows individual schools to assess their degree of systems performance through a set of scientifically proven concepts that are indicator of the system's health, including supportive climates, innovation and collaboration, and a strong focus on inclusion and individual development. Results from the tool can indicate individual schools' systems health level, and schools will be able to make informed decisions for improvement based on the results. And for any weaknesses spotted, schools will be able to work with the local research partners to come up with the particular strategies, or they can access the resources shared by the weavers across the larger global pool of expertise for improvement strategies. It's still a work in progress. And this is the unique feature of the tool, which is the weaving part, meaning that schools have the opportunities to not only share their educational practices, their successful stories, issues and challenges, but also exchange insights with other school systems across the globe that are also using the tool. So this entire project make these improvement efforts at a global scale. Well, at the end of the talk, I know I've been had used time. I'd like to leave you with a few questions to chew on. The first one is, how do educational systems might most effectively create conditions to support all to engage in learning and change efforts? And the second question is, what would be the most needed change to policy and practice to help facilitate learning ecosystem and better results for schools? We can think about the role and function of networks, intentional infrastructure design, and the level of change we aim to achieve when we reflect on these two questions. I hope today's talk is to some extent useful and relevant to some of your research and study context, and thank you for listening.